Alright, so if you watched my previous video, this little box here on the top of these notes basically sum up what I tried to say in the previous video. So this is a nice little thing to have here. I'll let you look over it, read it, and hopefully this clears things up for you and gives you a nice visual. These notes can be printed from Canvas. You have access to these notes, so if you want to print those before I get started so you can follow along, that's not a bad idea. I do want to mention one thing. For inequality notation, in the previous video I did say that if one side is a number and the other side is an infinity, that you don't have to write the infinity in inequality notation. So for example, on a number line, this would be from 5 and higher, so 5 to infinity. We can simply write just x is greater than 5. Okay, so I will use that notation when writing these domain and ranges. So if you recall, domain and range, all domain and ranges is domain is the set of all x's that lie in a particular function, and range is the set of all y's that lie in a particular function. So for example, I've labeled here on this graph right here the x and y ordered pairs that the graph goes directly through. Now for the domain, I can't just write -4, 0, and 4 because there's other x values that lie on this line. Like for example, there's an x value of -2 that lies on this line. Sorry, I gotta do it like this. Okay, it has a corresponding y value that lies on this line. Now -5 doesn't land or isn't found on this line. So -5 isn't going to be within the domain. So our domain is going to be, you start with the lowest x value that lies on our function, which in this case is -4. And our highest x value is +4. Okay, so x is between -4 and 4. Now we just have to put in the inequality symbols. Well, -4 is the smallest, so that means that x has to be bigger than -4. Now I know we use the less than symbol. We use the less than symbol because x is on the right of that number. So this reads -4 is less than or equal to x, which is the same thing as x is greater than or equal to -4. Okay, and all x values have to be less than or equal to +4, since that's the point that's furthest to the right. So it also gets a less than or equal to, and it's equal to because of this closed dot. Okay, so now the range. When looking at the range, you look at the lowest y value and you go to the highest y value. So our lowest y value is found here at -3. We're talking about y's with range, so y goes in the middle. And the highest y value is +3. So our graph goes from -3 on the y-axis to +3 on the y-axis. And since both dots are closed, they get less than or equal to signs. When you're writing inequality notation and you have two endpoints, so there's no infinities involved, okay, the signs are always going to face this way. Okay, so now all we want to do is take this notation and write them in both interval notation and set notation. So interval notation for the domain would be a bracket because it's less than or equal to -4, comma 4 with a bracket. Our range is going to be from -3 to 3, and again brackets on both sides. And there's interval notation. Finally, set notation just uses the bracket to represent a set, or a curly bracket, I should say. So it's the set of all x's such that -4 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to +4. And then close your bracket. All right, and then for the range, it's the set of all y's such that -3 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to 3. And there we have our domain and range for this function. So again, just to repeat myself, all domain and range tells us is the restrictions on x and y for any particular functions. So this function only exists between -4 and 4 on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, all y's are between -3 and 3. Okay, so example 2. So we'll start with the domain. So domain, you always look at the furthest point to the left and the right, so you can look at the endpoints. Okay, so the furthest x to the left is -4. The furthest x to the right is 5. So we're going to have an inequality notation from -4 and 5. Now we just have to put in our symbols. Notice that it's an open circle. So an open circle tells us that these are going to be strictly less than signs. Okay, now our range we cannot look at the endpoints, because if we just use the endpoints, we would say that our graph goes from -3 to -1. But what about this point right here, this point 1, 3? It's going to be, 3 is going to be inside the range, so we need to include that. So for range, you always go lowest to highest, and it's not always going to be endpoints. Okay, so your lowest y value is -3. Range is always y values. And the highest y value is +3 up here. Notice it's not the endpoint. All right, so we need to figure out the inequality. So at -3 on the y is not included, so it's going to get strictly less than. However, this 3, there's not an open dot there. The graph just crosses through that point. So unless there's an open dot, we say that that point is included. So I'm going to use the less than or equal to sign. So there's your range. Now we just need to write it in the different notations. So in interval notation, the domain would be parentheses -4, comma 5 parentheses. And the range should be -3 with parentheses, comma 3 with a bracket. Because again, 3 is included in our set of y values. And then finally, set notation, you just have the set of all x's such that -4 is less than x is less than 5. Also, with the range, the set of all y's such that -3 is less than y, which is less than 3. Less than or equal to, 3. And that's it. Okay, finally, we have this here. This graph doesn't show any endpoints. There's arrows on both sides. So if there's arrows, that means it continues forever to the right and up. And a left arrow means forever to the left and in the down direction as well. Okay, so our domain would be, well, every single x that's on the x-axis is going to have a corresponding y value. So we're in our all real numbers situation. So for inequality notation, you could write all real numbers for both of them. So I'm just going to put quotations here. That quotation means it's just the same. Or you could write, let's say we're writing the range, you could write negative infinity less than y less than positive infinity. But I think it's easier just to state all real numbers. Okay, for interval notation, the domain again, all real numbers. Or if you see this written, that notation also means all real numbers. Negative infinity to infinity with parentheses. Either one of those I'll accept. Okay, and then set, you could just write all real numbers again. I'll accept that. Or you could write it's a set of all x such that x is an element of the real numbers. Okay, and then for the range, you could write it like this. Or again, simply all real numbers. So that's a little refresher on how to do domain and range.